Thank you for having me. Glad to be here. So I'd like to talk today about love, and specifically, we're talking about ideas worth sharing. So I'm actually going to start off by telling you what my idea is, which is you can love today. So I started out at NC State. Basically, I read a bunch of success literature, self-help type stuff, and it taught me about how to think in different ways. And it taught me about how, your thinking, your beliefs, your actions all obviously affect our lives. So, the self-help stuff, it got me going. It gave me a good start as to how to be more conscious and on point with your life. But there was something else. There was something inside me that was a little bit restless, and I knew that there was more to that picture. I knew that thinking positively and acting positively and treating others well was a great start, but I had other questions about life itself and what was going on. So we started off by collecting all of our research. Like basically there was a foray into spirituality and consciousness where I went to a Mind, Body, Spirit Expo event and I discovered a lot of pretty wild stuff, healing, crystals, quantum physics type stuff, and it was very overwhelming. I didn't really know what to do with it, but I knew there was something significant there. It was introducing us to the more mysteries out there, cosmic mysteries, mysteries about reality, and I really was hungry to learn more about that. So I got together with a friend of mine who had also been studying similar topics, and what we decided to do was gather our exercises, meditations, quotes, practices that were beneficial to living. And what we ended up moving into was basically we came up with this thing called the Loveolution, which is we call it a global love media outlet, which is essentially a platform, a blog, where people can express themselves and their philosophies of unconditional love. They might just be sharing stories, they might be sharing personal experiences, they might actually be sharing practices that they do on a regular basis. Some of the people might be life coaches, some of the people are just lay people, some are teachers, and then some are just students of life. So that's kind of what we've created, and that got me started on love. What is love? What is it all about? And the best way to start that is take sort of a philosophical perspective, define love, add a context to it. If you were to look in Webster's dictionary, you would find that love is a strong affection for another based on kinship, attraction based on sexual desire, affection based on admiration or benevolence, warm attachment, enthusiasm, or devotion, the object of attachment or devotion, a beloved person. But really the above are only words for such a broad concept. So it's easier, I should say, to understand love by thinking like a philosopher. So how do you know it's love? What makes it describable? Do you feel it? Do you see it? Do you smell it? Are you thinking it? What is happening? As Freud said, at its height, the state of being in love threatens to obliterate the boundaries between ego and object. So what I'm really saying is that when you start really considering love, you'll find that there's a lot that our philosophy and beliefs actually dictate what love is. After all, everyone in here may have a different version of what love is. So let's start with some basic definitions of love. The Greeks came up with eros, philia, and agape. So eros, named after the Greek god of love, is based on a more intense physical desire and passion. To Plato, the classic Greek philosopher, eros was a desire that seeks transcendental beauty. He concluded that beauty, true beauty, exists in the world of forms or ideas. So he didn't necessarily take it literally as directly through a person, maybe, as we would be attracted. He was saying it's the essence of that beauty. Socrates consistently claimed that knowledge in the art of love or the love of wisdom was the way to approach it. And really the conclusion of this perspective is the love we generate for beauty on this earth can never truly be satisfied until we die. Love not the individual, but the element of beauty they possess. So what's philia? Well, philia is what I call people love. So it's taking care of, love thy neighbor. Very simple. Taking care of each other as a friend. And my reason for telling you about all these different aspects of love is to show you that it's not just one thing. Typically, we think of love as a romantic love, but there's actually various capacities for us to love. Think about, you love your mom, you love your dad, you love a brother, you love a sister, you love a friend, and then you may love a mate or a lover, and there's a whole different range of effects on us. So a lot of the time when people say love, they're just thinking romantic love. Agape is a more transcendent, all-encompassing, altruistic love. Love of creation, love of God, love of the universe. You know, it's more of a universal approach towards love, loving, you know, everything, loving the creator. You know, a lot of people say the creator, whatever it was that created what's in front of us. You know, I looked into the history of marriage a little bit, and right now we get to marry for who we want, and we get to really dictate a lot of those terms, whereas, you know, early on, you know, people were not allowed to love or not allowed to really marry, and if marriage is representing love in this case, you know, people were not allowed to do that. You know, marriage was more of a strategic, preserving your lineage, preserving your assets, expanding your empire, and, you know, the familial unit was not as love-based. You know, your feelings really didn't matter as much early on, and so it wasn't until we started to get into really I want to say 18th, 19th century, the church started to sort of change its position a little bit, get a little more liberal, and then really the Industrial Revolution, and specifically the invention of the car, it allowed dating to actually kind of take place in a more away from the family unit. You know, the 50s, you had, you know, sort of the Norman Rockwell perfect marriage. You know, marriage was almost considered a requirement, and if you weren't married, you know, you were sort of, you know, an outcast. So, and then, you know, the 70s was sort of a time of social transformation, and, you know, from feminism to civil rights, marriage became more of an option, you know, and there was more expression in people's independence, you know, and today now we have, you know, the LGBT community trying to get married and seeking those rights. So love itself has gone through a lot of a very volatile history, and it's something that we should, I think, be proud of, that we have come to a point where we know more about love and how we want it to be dictated through our legal systems. According to neuroscience, there are 3 distinct neural networks in the brain for love. There's attachment, caregiving, and of course sex. So attachment determines who we turn to for support. These are the people we miss most when they're absent. Caregiving, this gives us the urge to nurture people for whom we feel the most concern. When we are attached, we cling. When we are caregiving, we provide. And sex is, well, sex. Nature designed the 3 networks to intermingle in an elegant balance. And really, we need each of these areas to be satisfied before we can move on. Now, I'd like to talk about Bruce Lipton. He wrote a book called The Biology of Belief. And he has come up with, well, he hasn't come up with it, but there's this field called epigenetics, which literally means control above genetics. And this is saying that genes are not destiny, that environmental influences, such as nutrition, stress, and emotions, and I would make the argument possibly love, can modify these genes without changing their basic blueprint. So the takeaway is that, you know, the cell's operations are primarily molded by its interaction with the environment and not the genetic code. So what I'm really saying is that all that success literature and, you know, being more conscious actually may have a scientific basis. There's been this term called physiological coherence, and what that is a term for love that they have measured in a lab. So I'm going to show you some graphs where they actually measure heart rhythms and heart patterns. Basically, in this chart, you're seeing erratic heart patterns with frustration. They're jagged and not very harmonious looking. And the appreciation has a more ordered rhythm. And they found that these states had feeling angry, feeling frustrated, versus feeling happy, appreciative of another, had very significant readings. And on the right part of this, they found that anger versus even relaxation, compared with that coherence I was describing, they found significant differences in the wavelengths, in the actual amplitude. In fact, the amplitude put out when someone was in a physiological coherent state was about 6 times greater than even just being in a relaxed state. There's also this concept of the heart-brain, which I think is fascinating, discovered by Dr. Andrew Armour. He discovered in 1991, basically that the heart has its own brain. So meaning there's actual neurons in the heart. The heart's brain is an intricate network of several types of neurons, neurotransmitters, proteins, and support cells like those found in the brain proper. Its elaborate circuitry enables it to act independently of the cranial brain, to learn, remember, and even feel and sense. The heart's nervous system contains around 40,000 neurons, called sensory neurites, which detect circulating hormones, neurochemicals, and sense heart rate and pressure information. Now, Roland McCready, there's an organization called the Institute of Heart Math, and they've actually been published in various peer-reviewed scientific journals. What they observed was this: the heart was acting as though it had a mind of its own and was profoundly affecting perception, intelligence, and awareness. Our studies dovetail with other researchers doing related work that more than simply being a blood pump. The heart is a highly complex, self-organized sensory organ with its own functional, intrinsic brain. And there was a really crazy story of someone getting a heart transplant of a woman who was murdered. And they actually got memories of the murder itself, to where they were able to actually piece together the actual murderer themselves, and the police used that to actually catch the person. So, that story really made me think a lot about, the significance of this heart-brain theory, because, there's a lot there, there's a lot that's unexplained, but, it really, I think, is indicative of some things that we need to think about, some new hypotheses, perhaps. So the heart's magnetic field is actually 5,000 times stronger than that produced by the brain. It's 40 to 60 times stronger in amplitude. These are all measured by a magnetometer. They were able to see that it was also measurable in the other person's brain waves. And what they did was they measured people that were in that physiological coherent state that we were talking about. This organization has different practices similar to what we created with the Loveolution. Getting into these feeling states of love indicate that there's a significant biological and physiological impact on our health. So, another thing that they found, Helen Fisher, she wrote a book called Why We Love, and she found that men and women actually had different processing centers of the brain. The male brain, pretty much the visual processing centers were activated, which makes a lot of sense, the way guys are. But they found that with women, it was more memory centers and emotional processing centers, versus, they noticed that actual significant, difference. The one thing that was similar is that both in men and women, there was a release of dopamine and norepinephrine. And really what that says is that our bodies are doping us up, like drug addicts in a way. And those are reward centers of our brain that are being affected by this feeling state of love. And I would actually say that it's more of what they were testing was more of a romantic state, because they were testing lovers, so they weren't testing like a friend and how you would feel towards a friend. So really, this concept of romantic love and how our biology affects it is significantly important. And really the take home is love more. But how? One way is to simply observe. Stop, observe. Observe how we react to life. So often we're so afraid of how people are going to react to us and what people are going to say. And am I saying the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? You know, in the end, people respond in kind. So just, you know, living courageously, getting out there and talking to people and approaching them in a friendly way. Based on my research, you know, with the way our neural networks are affected, that our brains are literally wired through our interactions with people. And as we interact with each other and others, that is developing those pathways and those areas. You know, do we have a lot of conflict in our lives? Are we striving for harmony? Are we striving for, you know, peaceful relationships? Are we striving for helpful relationships? You know, Aldous Huxley talked about our institutions being organized lovelessness. So coming together in love to share ideas. You know, these are the kind of areas that, you know, are extremely significant. You know, when you think of the organized lovelessness, well, the opposite of that could be organized love. You know, I think a big part of this is also that biological influences are simply tendencies. You know, the fact that we get doped up by, you know, all these different chemicals experiencing romantic love is just a huge piece of it. So, you know, we have to overcome any extreme emotions we feel. I'd like to end with a Yoga Sutra quote, which is, by cultivating attitudes of friendliness towards happiness, compassion towards suffering, delight toward virtue, and equanimity toward vice, thoughts become purified, and the obstacles to self-knowledge are lessened. Thank you very much.